Hi, welcome to this video on doing big data analytics for Microsoft 365. I'm Rakesh Chenchery, the CTO of Preventec Limited, one of the Microsoft preferred partners for Content AI. With the recent release of Microsoft Copilot, it's becoming more and more important for organizations to understand the content that's available within their M365 environment. And there are many ways in which you can get this information, but I would like to show you one way to pull information from the entire tenant at scale and then do the right analytics. For this, we will use some of the recently released products and functionalities from Microsoft, one being Microsoft Fabric, and the other is the Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint, which was formerly called Syntax Project Archimedes. So when you talk of analytics, there are generally three things that are needed. One, you need to bring the data, you need to extract the data from the source or various sources. The extracted data there could be millions of documents or millions of entities. When you look at a typical Microsoft 365 environment, there could be thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of sites and libraries and potentially millions of files. So you need to look at how can you bring these large amounts of data into a central environment for analytics. When you deal with large amounts of data, you need to worry about throttling because that's something you have to work with. Otherwise, you will not be able to bring all the data. The next is to minimize the data transfer. You don't need to be bringing the millions of items every time. So some way of working with delta is quite important. And in addition to that, you might have to bring data from other systems, maybe your other line of business systems, and then merge that with the M365 data to do further analytics. Then the next phase is processing. Once you brought the data into your environment, you need to process it. And the processing would involve cleansing, some pre-processing, maybe denormalizing the data. And in some cases, you have to remodel the data to get the right type of information. You might have to bring data from other line of business environment and then merge that to bring the right to develop the right data sets for your business intelligence. Once you have the right data, the third thing is reporting. And the reporting has to be simple, it has to be intuitive, it needs to give the right level of information to the end user, have the right drill through capabilities and so on. And at the same time, have an ability to share these reports and have the right security so the right people are seeing the right set of data. So, how do we do this? What options are available? If you look at the current options to bring data from M365, most people have been using the CSOM API for a very long time. In addition to the CSOM APIs, there are REST APIs, and then there are Microsoft Graph APIs that are available to get the data. A lot of the developers would be familiar with the PNP PowerShell, which is a PowerShell wrapper around some of these existing APIs. But in addition to that, there are other ways you can bring data. One not so popular method is the async metadata read. AMR is not very easy for everyone to implement, and that's why it's not very popular. AMR would bring back the entire manifest of data from a library, and you can then use that to extract the necessary information. But in addition to that, there is also Microsoft Graph Data Connect, and that's what we will look at in this session. Then once you bring the data, in order to process the data, you have lots of options. Excel is obviously a very popular option with most people, but then it has its limitations when you deal with large data sets and complex processing. You can build your own custom solution using third-party solutions or other ETL solutions, databases, and so on. Or you can use Azure Data Factory and Power BI, which allows you to build pipelines to bring the data in and then Power BI to build the reports. Or you could have used Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a combination of those Data Factory, Power BI, and the rest of the infrastructure bolted together to form a single platform. And with the release of Fabric, that is obviously a popular choice because Fabric gives you the right environment to bring everything, do the necessary processing. But before we delve into all this, I would like to touch upon something very important. There's a lot of confusion when people talk about graph. So when you talk of Microsoft Graph, there are three things you need to look into. One is the Graph API. The Graph APIs are the most popular one. Everybody knows about that. You go to the Microsoft Graph Explorer and you can try out those APIs. And these are real-time access to data. Uh, it has access to most of the entities, not just SharePoint, but you could look at Exchange or Calendar. So there's a graph endpoint that will bring back all the relevant information. The second is graph connectors. And graph connectors are used for data ingestion from third-party system to bring the data into M365 so it can be indexed. And with the advent of Copilot, that is getting popular because that's one way to bring the data into your semantic index. The third is Graph Data Connect. And this is very different from Graph API or the graph connectors. What you need to realize is all of this work with graph, and that's what this diagram is showing with this blue dotted line, that is the graph boundary. But all of these three are three different ways of working with that graph data. So Graph Data Connect is used to bring data in bulk from the graph environment into an area for you to process it. So it's for bulk data access for analytics. So what exactly is Microsoft Graph Data Connect? So Graph Data Connect is a way to access the rich data that is currently present in Microsoft Graph. It describes how users communicate, collaborate, or work with different files and applications in Microsoft 365. So this is ideal for big data analytics. And if you look at this diagram, it shows that it can bring data at scale. So if you have millions of objects, you can bring that information in a single call. There is a lot of granular consent, and this allows you to make sure that the requesting application only has access to a certain set of data or even to certain columns within that data set. And that's quite important because you don't want to expose the entire data set, and you can have very granular consent to each application. You also have the necessary security and governance in place to make sure that the right set of data comes and is only accessible by the right set of people. Once the data comes into Azure, this is where you can then use all of the services available within Azure to do the magic on the data, to do the necessary pre-processing, the cleansing, any machine learning, and all of that can be done in conjunction with other data sets that you can then merge. You can bring data from your own line of business applications or other product data and so on, and combine them to do the right business intelligence reporting. So, what is Microsoft Fabric? Most of you would have heard of Synapse Analytics, which have been popular for quite some time. And Fabric was the next evolution from Synapse Analytics. So, this is a single platform that provides a single data storage, which is the One Lake. So, One Lake is like the OneDrive for data. So this is where the data comes in. You manage your One Lake. You can have the compliance and governance from Microsoft Purview applied on that One Lake. And all of the Copilot functionality is also available in Fabric. But the interesting thing is the various sections for managing the data, right from your data engineering side. So using the data factory to bring the data, to ingest large amounts of data, using the other tools to do the cleansing, pre-processing, and then the necessary warehousing. You can even run all your machine learning on this data to do more predictive analytics and so on, which will help you to do the right set of reporting that's needed. So Fabric really brings together all of the tools that are needed for your analytics in one single place. So what are the advantages of Microsoft Graph Data Connect and Fabric while doing M365 analytics? First, we need to understand what exactly is the Graph Data Connect for SharePoint. This used to be called Project Archimedes, which was part of the Syntex family. A few months ago, Microsoft rebranded Syntex to SharePoint Premium to avoid any confusion. So everything that was consumption based had an additional cost over the standard SharePoint license was termed to be SharePoint Premium. I mean, that's a very simple way to look at it, and which is true for most of the case. Everything from e-signatures or backup, archive, the document understanding models, everything had a cost based on consumption, and that was SharePoint Premium. Graph Data Connect, or the Project Archimedes, also works on a consumption model based on the number of objects that you retrieve. But for some reason, Graph Data Connect didn't become part of SharePoint Premium. Instead, it is now branded as Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint, which is a lot, but you can just call it MGDC. So Graph Data Connect for SharePoint and OneDrive, obviously, it's used to derive insights on the usage, the capacity, or the security. It can bring all of this at scale with a single call, get that into the Azure tenant to perform the right set of machine learning, the advanced analytics, any predictive analytics, and then derive insights from it. And Fabric obviously is a very good platform to do this. A Fabric, which was the evolution from Synapse Analytics, is an ideal platform to ingest this big data using Azure Data Factory, run all your machine learning, and then generate the reports using Power BI and then share it across the enterprise. The other important advantage is the direct lake mode that is currently available. So for people who have been working with Power BI, you would be aware of the import mode and the direct query mode, which allows you to work directly with the data source like SQL Server and so on. So the direct lake mode allows you to work directly with the Parquet files, which are the most efficient form of files compared to JSON. It's smaller, and you can load these files directly from your lakehouse without having to import this. And this makes your querying and analyzing of data extremely fast. So this is one of the great capabilities of working with Fabric in that particular mode. So, how do you get started? In order to get started, there are a few steps. There's a lot of documentation on the Microsoft site, which provides you step by step detail on how to set this up. But what you will notice is a lot of that information is to set up things with Synapse Analytics rather than with Fabric. So, today I'm going to show you how you can use this with Fabric. In order to get started, you first need to enable the data connect within your tenant. And you would do that by going onto the admin center and enabling it. Next, you need to create the application identity, which is an app registration within Azure AD or Entra ID. This allows you to access data based on that identity. Third, create a Fabric Lakehouse. And this is where the instructions will differ, because if you're going the Fabric route, you just have to create a lakehouse. And then the next step is to use the Microsoft Graph Data Connect application. So this is an entity available in Azure. Once you create that, you can assign it or you can associate it with the Azure app registration that was created, and also with the lakehouse where you want the data to be moved into. And then you need to approve this application, and this is where the consent is put in place based on the data sets and the columns that were chosen when you set up the Graph Data Connect application. You then have to go, and admin will have to consent in order to approve the extraction of data. Once you have configured everything, the next would be to create that build activity in order to fetch the data. For this, you will create either a pipeline or a data flow. And if it's a pipeline, you would typically have the copy activity. And once a copy activity is put in place to copy from M365 into the Fabric Lakehouse, you would then do the necessary remodeling of data. And once the data is in the right way, the right format, you would then build the Power BI report and share it with the end users. So now I will go through some of the steps to actually show you how this can be done. But I hope this gives you a good overview of the entire process, what Data Connect is all about, and what can be done. Let's look at the steps that are needed to enable Graph Data Connect and get the data in for reporting. First, we need to enable Graph Data Connect on the tenant. For that, go to Microsoft Admin Center, select Org Settings, and you will see the Microsoft Graph Data Connect. You need to go in and turn that on. So turn on Graph Data Connect and select the SharePoint Online and OneDrive datasets to be available. Once you turn that on, the next thing would be to create an application. So I've already created an app registration. You can very well just go into Enter ID and create an app registration. You don't need to worry about any of the API permissions. It's just the standard API permission that comes up. All your consent around the API permission, the data sets, that is all going to be defined in the Microsoft Graph Data Connect entity, which I'll come to in a minute. So once you create this app registration, all you need to remember is the app ID. And once you have that, just go and look for Graph Data Connect, and you will see this Microsoft Graph Data Connect appear in there. So that's the screen. I already have a Graph Data Connect entity created here, but all you need to do is just create one, select the application ID, which is just the app registration you just created. Select it to be a multi-tenant or a single tenant. So obviously, if you're creating applications for other users, other tenants, then you would create a multi-tenant one. In my case, instead of using Synapse, I'm going to use Fabric as my compute type because I have some trial Fabric capacity. And the activity type will be copy, because that's where you would copy the Graph Data Connect data into your environment. Then you provide the subscription or resource group. And this is the important one. Instead of using a storage account, use a Fabric Lakehouse. And the moment you use a Fabric Lakehouse, it'll give you the workspace and the lakehouse. So I've got a temporary lakehouse that I've already created for my demo. And that's a bronze lakehouse. Why bronze? Some of you might be familiar with the medallion architecture. If you're used to working with such kind of big data, you would typically have those three layers of your bronze, silver, gold, and you would get the data into the bronze layer, do the curation and the remodeling into silver, and then have all the BI layer into the gold. So that's just an option. For the purpose of this demo, I just have a bronze layer. We'll pull the data in, and that's it. So once your graph application is ready, you can then provide the data sets that are needed. So the next thing would be the different data sets. So let's look at the data sets I already have configured. Here you can see the various data sets that are available. So you need to look for the SharePoint basic data set, SharePoint files, groups, permissions, and sites. Let's focus on the sites for now. And if you select the sites data set, you can specify the list of columns that you need. For now, I've selected everything, but this is where you can specify only the relevant columns that needs to be accessible by this application and which other data sets will be used. For the purpose of testing, I've selected few different data sets. And when you click update, or in the case where you're actually creating it, you will then end up creating this entire, this object, Graph Data Connect object. You would then have to go into your approval. So that's where you would go back into this area on your admin center, click on this Microsoft Graph Data Connect application portal, and there you would see the app. And if you select that, this is where you can review and approve. So you can do next, look at every data set, which columns are being allowed, and at the end, this obviously there are no changes in this particular one, so that's why you don't get that approved, but otherwise you will get the option to approve it. So which means all of those data sets are now approved for this particular application. So the next thing to do would be go to the lakehouse. So this lakehouse, for those who haven't seen Fabric, you can access it from a couple of ways. This is the Power BI side of things. You can have the data engineering view, different. It's based on different persona, but I'm just going to work in the Power BI view. So I have my workspace, and when I go into the workspace, the first thing to create would be this pipeline. So I already have a pipeline, but you can just create a new pipeline, and this is the Azure Data Factory pipeline. You can bring the data in either using pipelines or data flows. They all just work slightly differently. There are different costs associated with it, but in my case, pipeline is quite straightforward. And once you create the pipeline, all you have to do is add. You can use a copy assistance or add to the canvas a copy. Yeah. So this is my copy sites activity. That's the pipeline. So when you create the pipeline, you need to set the source and the destination, and the source would be a connection. So when you click on that connection, this connection is tied to your app registration, the one that you created earlier in Azure AD. That app registration, you need the app ID, the tenant ID, the client ID, and the key, the secret. So those are the three things you need to provide to that particular connection. And it's a connection of type M365. So if you were to go and create a new one, you will see Microsoft 365. And when you continue, it'll ask for the relevant information. Then you need to select the dataset that you want. So in our case, we are going to pick up the basic dataset, SharePoint sites dataset. And once that is selected, this is the important one, the date filter. If you need the entire set of data to be pulled down, then you need to have the start time and the end time as exactly the same date. By the way, the time part of it is ignored. So it's only the date which is important bit. If you're doing a delta discovery, then you specify the date intervals that you need the information for. Then in the destination, you would select your lakehouse and the table that you want the data to get into. So you would type in some table name. It'll all go there. It ultimately gets pulled in as a Parquet file, the Delta Parquet format, but it'll create these tables that you can work with. And in the advanced section, you could specify if you need to overwrite or append to that existing data set. And then in the mapping area, you can import the schema so that all of the columns are mapped, or you could just make any changes here if you want to make any alterations. So once that is done, it's as simple as running the pipeline, which generally takes about 10 minutes or so. So I've already done that. I've copied the sites and the permissions into my data set. And once it is within my semantic model, I can go and view the semantic model. And I can explore this data from here. And you can create few quick visuals and then see what the data looks like. Alternatively, you can go to the SQL Analytics endpoint, and here you can run a query. So this is your standard SQL queries against those tables. So we want to run this against the SP sites table. So I would do a new SQL query, run that. Oh, invalid object. The SI is a capital. So you just need to be careful. This is case sensitive. Yeah, there you go, 802. Yeah. So we can now build reports on that. You have another option. You can auto-create a report. And this will, and you can select the data. So you can select, let's say, from the SP side, and let's say a storage quota, root web ID. Let's just randomly select view. So you can see that it builds some very quick report on its own by selecting the columns that you need. Obviously, this might not give you the exact kind of rendering and the information you need, but it's quite good. You can have some very quick reports done using this. Alternatively, you can just go and create your own report or even download that onto Power BI desktop, make the changes, and upload it. I had created one earlier, a very simple report where it just pulled in the key sites based on the count. So this is all development environment. So there's a lot of QA development um, files in these sites, but just a quick count on OneDrives and the team sites and so on. So this gives you a good idea of how easy it is to pull all the data in and create the right kind of reports based on the information that's present within Microsoft 365. And irrespective of how large the data set is, it can get everything into your environment in a single command, and you can do the analytics on that entire data set. So this is where the power of Microsoft Graph Data Connect and Microsoft Fabric comes into play. So I hope you enjoyed the session on Microsoft Graph Data Connect and how you can bring in large amounts of data from Microsoft 365 and do the analytics on your data. I hope this gives you enough information to get started with it. Try this out and enjoy what you can do with it.